Hello Internet, it's Daniel with Driving and Dragons, and I'm doing things a little bit differently this time. I have, in an effort to stop some of my recording issues in terms of road noise, I am now flipping the camera around, picking up some views of where I'm headed, and then recording separately to see if we can maybe get a little bit better audio quality out of this for the time being. We'll see how it works on the other side as I go back to recap everything that has happened with Wizards of the Coast and how we can take Dungeons and Dragons back from Hasbro. See you on the other side. So when we have to look back at the entire Wizards of the Coast debacle over the past year or so, we really have to kind of understand the history of what's going on with Wizards and Dungeons and Dragons. Now, TSR, just to start off with, was no angel. They eventually were just as bad, if not worse, than Wizards Hasbro. But I would have said that the concept of TSR, they were at least in theory salvageable because TSR was never large to the point that Wizards is. Wizards is a division of Hasbro, which is a monstrous publicly traded company. Now, when a company becomes publicly traded, it kind of loses its ability to have an identity. And the reason is because the CEOs and the higher level executives, their duty is to the shareholder. You're right when you say they don't care about the customer. They only care about the customer insofar as people continue to buy their products and consume their media and generate revenue for them. Then you have the guys who are lower on the totem pole, and they're a collection of people who care only in as far as their paycheck is concerned, all the way up to the gamut of people who truly care about the product, have pride in their workmanship, and want to provide something good for the client on those grounds. And then when you have a company the size of Hasbro, the entire middle management structure is a group of people who don't care about anyone except themselves and are not incentivized to care about anybody except themselves. That includes the shareholders and the customers. This is just the nature of the beast when it comes to these large corporations. You get these middle management people, and this would go to, in my opinion, all the way up to the top of Wizards of the Coast, because the top of Wizards of the Coast is the bottom rung of the upper level of Hasbro, or it's the upper rung of the middle management. And those people, by and large, did not come from the lower end of the spectrum. They were not promoted from game designer to game design project manager to project team lead to director of operations, so on and so forth. They were hired from other corporations, and they got into the positions with the other corporations being hired out of institutions and universities based off of the fraternities they were in, the company they kept, the name that's on their sheepskin. It was because they went to Harvard or Duke or Yale or Vanderbilt or Rice or Stanford or any number of these other institutions where they all got together, and for lack of a better term, they exist in a world where they're in an echo chamber that is combined with a circle jerk. A prime example of this is the Bud Light scandal with Dylan Mulvaney. Essentially, the woman who did that never has to worry about a job for the rest of her life. The executive who made that call. She's not going to get fired. She wasn't fired. She was put on a suspended leave of absence with pay, and she will get hired onto another company who will fabricate another title for her. She gets a promotion and a raise and a pat on the back from the people that she sits around, and they talk about the issues as if the issues matter to the general customer. They don't care who they piss off. They don't care what they do to the product. They virtue signal, and then they get hired by another company based on that virtue signal. Now, the reason that this kind of thing matters is with a company the size of Hasbro, it doesn't matter what happens. This will happen over and over and over again. Wizards of the Coast will never escape this kind of issue moving forward, because they'll get rid of the person who did this, who created the OGL scandal, who sent the Pinkertons over to take away Magic cards, who created the entire debacle of the way they want to monetize the player base. They'll get rid of them by them being hired away by, I don't know, Coca-Cola or Walmart or someplace. Just name a large-scale business operation. And they'll replace them with more people who have the same thing, the same mentality, even if they come from a different camp. And next thing you know, Dungeons and Dragons will be used to push another type of agenda, and to signal a different kind of social virtue. And it'll be another thing that's not good to the player base. And meanwhile, the upper management will constantly look down under the philosophy of, if we're not growing, we're dying. So how are you going to grow our revenue? So the only real way to quote unquote save Dungeons and Dragons, at least in the form that we all know and love, in a manner that is focused on the player base, is to get it away from Wizards of the Coast. So a quick breakdown. What is the reason that Wizards of the Coast is not what we... First off, is Wizards of the Coast was never, in the whole big scheme of things, was never great. They started their existence hiding Magic the Gathering in other shell companies to protect them during ongoing legal battles over IP litigation against other parties that they were basically ripping off. And they've been this way from day one. TSR was just as bad about that. But at least until the Hasbro purchase, Wizards of the Coast, just like TSR, was a small enough corporation that direct customer conflict was meaningful, would result in people having their jobs taken, would result in restructuring if you had enough backlash. With a company the size of Hasbro, it doesn't matter. The people above are running a corporation as a whole, and as long as the cash register is ringing, they don't care. People at the bottom don't really have any authority because they're not going to get promoted into that middle level management structure, that lower level executive structure anyway. So they don't really have that kind of force and authority. And as long as Dungeons and Dragons owned by Wizards in its current form, you're not going to see it return to any semblance of what we as a community. So there's two things that we have to do. The first thing is a full-scale boycott, not of D&D, but of Wizards of the Coast. We have to go to Wizards and say, you tried the stunt with 4th edition, where you tried to take away the OGL. Then you tried it again with the OGL debacle. Then there was the sweatshop debacle, where they were using sweatshop labor for a bunch of things to save costs. Then you have the monetization scheme, where we want to monetize the player base by basically getting rid of physical media, or at least heavily minimizing physical media, moving everything into a digital format that can be taken, adjusted, updated, and corrected, and restricted, and then charging players to basically play the game in a way that was not compatible. Then you have the situation where they continue to ram social causes and social justice projects and things of this nature that have nothing to do with the game through it. When we start making wheelchair accessible dungeons for some stupid reason to pander to a group. When we start having species instead of race. When we start taking away half races. When we start making adjustments to the actual core mechanics of the game for the sole purpose of pandering to groups that don't play Dungeons and Dragons. They are not pandering to a small group of Dungeons and Dragons players who are a vocal minority about, say, transgender rights or something like that, or racism or whatever the case may be. They are pandering to a very, very vocal minority of people in general in social media, on your Twitters and your Facebooks and whatnot, that will blow anything up in order to advance their social cause. And you're talking about people who never played Dungeons and Dragons, probably don't have an idea what a monster manual or a player's handbook or a dungeon master's guide is, have no idea. If you ask them, hand me a D8, they're going to look at you like you sprouted a second head. However, they will jump on Facebook and trumpet and give tons of free advertising to Dungeons and Dragons because they were so brave in changing race to species. What a bold stance. Or if they kowtow or reverse course on something like that, or the wrong minority hears it, they'll yell them into the ground and they'll talk about boycotts when they don't actually buy anything anyway. But the bad publicity, WOTC will turn around and capitulate to it. Not because Wizards of the Coast cares, but because those middle management people, those upper middle management people, the lower executives, the senior vice president with 14 words attached to it, director of senior vice presidents of sales or some stuff, that single person wants to take that, do something about it, and then put it on their resume that they did something about it so they can get recruited by somebody else. It will not stop. It will never go away. In order to get around this, there's one thing we can do as a player base, and that is boycott Wizards of the Coast specifically. Do not buy Magic cards from Wizards of the Coast or from the card store that is picking them up from a Wizards of the Coast distributor. Do not buy new Dungeons & Dragons books. If you need a Dungeons & Dragons book, you need to get it secondhand. Or you need to focus extremely heavily on the third-party content creators that are not Wizards of the Coast associated. Don't go to DM's Guild. If you do go to DM's Guild, only pick up stuff that's free. But don't go to DM's Guild. Go to Drive-Thru RPG, find OGL content. Get on your Facebook groups and Facebook forums, find the creators, find the adventures that they write, find the new supplements that they put together, go to places like the DM's Lair, and subscribe to things like his Lair magazine. I'm not his biggest fan. I do like a lot about Luke over there at DM Lair, but at the end of the day, you could pay him a small amount of money to be part of his Patreon list and get access to years worth of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons content that he put together. That's all very high quality stuff, and Wizards of the Coast doesn't see a dime of anything on it. And what I would say is sit down now. Go to your Dungeons & Dragons book collection. Look through every single thing that is available there and say, what do I have to have? What's missing that I really need? Make a list. If you absolutely cannot find a must-have book or a must-have adventure and you cannot find it third party, go find it from, do it from a third-party publisher like Drive-Thru RPG so Wizards gets less. Worst case scenario is to buy it from Wizards of the Coast, and then only if it's something that for whatever reason you just absolutely must have. From then on out, don't buy anything that is from Wizards of the Coast. Everything secondhand, everything third-party sources. This is not to hurt Dungeons and Dragons. This is specifically to attack the Wizards of the Coast bottom line. And it is to motivate them to do one of two things. Either the first thing is to have Hasbro spin off Wizards of the Coast. In other words, they say, we're separating Wizards of the Coast. It is no longer a division of Hasbro. It is just another company. Usually this will take place right before they sell Wizards of the Coast. And then another company can pick it up, or other investors can pick it up and possibly revamp it in a positive light to start with. Or what would be far more beneficial, something that would be much better, damage the bottom line of Wizards of the Coast publishing division to the point that they sell the Dungeons & Dragons IP to another company. Maybe that's a Paizo. Maybe that's a Green Ronin. Maybe that's a Cobbled Press. Maybe that's a totally new organization. But make it to where it is not worth it for them. They will make more money selling the IP than they will continuing to produce Dungeons & Dragons. And then you have to watch the new company that owns it, like a Hawk 2. Watch them. Hopefully they grow. Hopefully they're successful. They will eventually grow to the point where they need to go public or be sold off or purchased or acquired by a company, that makes games and toys and stuff, be that a Hasbro, Parker Brothers, whatever the case may be. And then we have to wash, rinse, and repeat in a few. But we need to force them to sell it off. And you can do that by buying new games, going to their competitors, playing other things, focusing on what you already have, and then making sure that anything you buy from third-party sources that do not benefit the Wizards of the Coast bottom line. The second thing you can do that can help push this, and this one is going to be a little bit more irritating for a lot of us. A lot of us get a lot of material from forums, from Facebook pages and groups, from Reddits, from all these different sources, Discord servers, YouTube channels, that sort of thing. And this, like I said, stings a little bit because some of these are really good groups as a whole, and you don't want to lose the resources. But if you are in a group, be it on Facebook, be it on Reddit, be it a Discord server, and that server utters things like, quote unquote, anti-Wizards propaganda, anti-Hasbro propaganda, or acts like anytime you bring up the misbehavior of Wizards of the Coast or the way they treat the player base, and they mention that as either propaganda or anti-D&D, it is time to leave that group, particularly if it is a group that censors that content. If you have people coming out posting videos like this one, videos like the ones the DM's Layers have done, videos like As Much As I Can't Stand This channel, the Dungeons and Discourse channel, or Bob World Builder, for instance, when they come out and they say, here's why you need to watch Wizards of the Coast, here's what they're doing, here's why you need to move away from Dungeons and Dragons, here's why you need to do something else. And you post that kind of stuff and it gets blocked, comments stopped, taken down, and the last comments you see in there is like, we're not here to beat the dead horse of Wizards of the Coast. We're not here for anti-Dungeons and Dragons, anti-Wizards propaganda. Go boo-hoo elsewhere. These groups, you need to leave them. Now, you don't need to do the whole, this is not an airport, announce your departure thing, where you post the comment thread and say, hey, this is what this is. You can if you want to. I wouldn't, because to me, those just don't do much of anything. But quietly leave and encourage others to leave. If you're in a Discord server, you can say it, hey, look, guys, I just don't think this is what's best for the hobby. I don't think this is what's good for us as a whole. In long term, this is going to hurt us. If we can't have open conversations about how these publishers damage us as consumers. So as long as that's going to be the case, I'm just not going to be able to participate here, and leave. Go to the other groups. Go to places like Professor Dungeon Master's Dungeon Craft page. Plenty of open discourse there about all kinds of different things. He doesn't stop people from being pro Wizards of the Coast, even though he has very explicitly come out and stated why he is anti-Wizards of the Coast now. Same thing in Discord servers that you would have for channels like the DM's Lair and Nerdarchy and things of that nature. These channels, things that are run by people like this are going to allow you to have those discussions. And that is what is needed. If you have a group that you are part of and they are blocking this stuff out for any reason other than this is, if a group is stated to be specifically about mechanics and in-game stuff and nothing about the hobby, just the mechanics or just storytelling or just crafting adventures or something of that nature, it's a purely mechanical page and they stop everything else, unless it's something like that, you need to pack up and leave. And that kind of sucks because there's some useful material that a lot of these places have, especially because if you got 10,000 members on a Facebook group and you may have 1,000 guys in there who are career GMs. And I'm not talking about like they're paid GMs. I'm talking like they've been playing since the 70s and they have tons of use. Some of them you might have, published authors in there who are helping you craft stories for your game with advice. You may have very interesting discussions, but you got 5 admins who are stopping everything as quote unquote anti-Wizards of the Coast or anti-D&D propaganda. You gotta leave. So that's my point to make on Wizards of the Coast. I'm hoping it'll be the last point I have to make on them. But just do other things. If you're a dungeon master, pick up another book and say, hey, I'm running this. Well, my group doesn't want to do that. It's like, well, this is the game I'm running. Do you guys want to play or not? I'm going to play Pathfinder. I'm going to run Shadowrun. I'm going to run Cyberpunk. Whatever the case may be. I'm running this game. Or, hey, we're not doing anything at this table that is from any new book published by Wizards of the Coast. And I'm not going to participate in Discord servers that stop us from discussing the state of affairs in the hobby, not because of today, but because of what it can do tomorrow and years on down the line. So hopefully that's about as negative as I need to be today. And this video is going a little long anywho. I hope the new format works out pretty well. Let me know what you think about it, and let me know how you think of the audio. Comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time with something that has more to do with playing the games we love instead of protecting them from outside forces that are not as far beyond our control as we. See you next time.